welcome back to the Taiken Ramen channel. You guys know I live in the middle of nowhere, right? Well, I've been dying to show you just how incredible the food is where I'm from. It may not be traditional, but it is salty, fatty, and certainly a carefully crafted dish. Today, I'm going to share my special Midwest-style ramen with you. I started at my local butcher that has all of the charm of a happy little farm. I was looking for a cattle femur, and I found some shank cuts that had exposed marrow that were specially cut for making soup. Back home, I added about 5 pounds of bones and shank to a pot, and then covered about 3 times the volume of bones to meat in water. I put it on the stove at a low heat, trying to get things just barely simmering, looking for no more than 1 or 2 bubbles every couple of minutes. As the bones heated, a tiny amount of scum rose to the top. I skimmed this off and paid Nitro my rent for living in his house this month. I left the bones to stew overnight, at which point the broth had darkened, but not got cloudy, which was perfect. I gently ladled the soup out and then strained through a cheesecloth. The result was a beautiful, delicate broth with a strong aroma and light body. Broth complete. For the tare, I started by dry roasting 1 tablespoon each of black pepper and cloves on medium heat. Once smoking, I covered them in 2 cups of usukuchi shoyu for saltiness, and then added 2 teaspoons of smoked sea salt to amp up the smoke and salt profile, followed by 1/2 cup of the brine from spicy pickled jalapenos for acidity and nostalgic barbecue flavors. And finally, a tablespoon of molasses for rich sweetness. I simmered everything for about 5 minutes until looking like a fine bowl of forbidden Cocoa Puffs, and then strained it out. Tare complete. Next, I made the pork belly burnt ends. I started by cutting a slab of pork belly into even cubes, and then covered in an applewood dry rub and left to cure overnight. The next day, I headed out to the smoker and smoked these puppies at 225 for about 3 hours. At this point, I brought them inside and transferred them into a disposable baking dish where I dispersed a whole stick of butter and a generous amount of brown sugar. Back to the smoker for about 1 more hour, and then these little meat marshmallows were done. Look how squishy. And finally, I reserved the excess butter and sugar for the aroma oil. Burnt ends complete. Cheesy corn is a staple of barbecue, but cheese doesn't usually pair well with ramen, so I had to get creative with this one. I smoked some corn alongside the burnt ends, and then cut the corn off the cob and reserved for later. Now it's time to deal with this cheese. Lucky for us, no folding required.
Next step is to fold in the cheese.
What does that mean? What does fold in the cheese mean?
He folds it in.
I laid out a pack of white cheddar cheese curds on a non-stick silpat, and then threw that in the smoker until the cheese was one big smoky sheet. I set to painstakingly arranging the corn kernels in little spiral patterns, and then let the sheet completely cool. I grabbed a miniature biscuit cutter and cut out my little cheesy corn Naruto maki, which I think turned out adorable. Cheesy corn complete. For the noodles, I designed a 35% bread flour based noodle. I used 20% whole wheat based flour, and then worked in 1% vital wheat gluten for structure. I used type 2 kansui from the ramen supply company, which is 40% sodium carbonate and 60% potassium carbonate. Per the usual, I mixed all the flours together, and then mixed the water, salt, and kansui separately. I drizzled the kansui water into the mixing flours, and then set everyone down for a nice 45-minute nap.
Hey, you. finally awake.
After resting, I ran the Soboro through my new noodle rolling machine. It did an amazing job, and my full rundown on the machine will be in an upcoming video. These noodles only needed 2 laminations, which was a good thing because I wanted to cut them nice and thick, so they needed some structure to counteract how bulky they were going to be. Once they were about 2.5 millimeters thick, I cut them into portions and then ran them through the noodle cutter. I dusted them with cornstarch and gave half of them some curls just for the look. Noodles complete. When assembling, I used 50 milliliters of tare, 1 tablespoon of aroma oil, 500 milliliters of broth, followed by the noodles, burnt ends, cheesy corn, ajitama, and sunflower microgreens. I was so amped to dig into this bowl. The noodles had a really satisfying bounce, while still being slippery and smooth. The burnt ends were a really satisfying blend of crunchy and melty textures. The egg was just right and worked to complement the pork. But by far, my favorite part of this bowl was the cheesy corn. It felt sort of wrong to include cheese in ramen, but the cheese curds were perfect for the job. They stayed together even in the hot broth, so it wasn't as if somebody just threw some grated cheese into your bowl. And the corn added a sweet twist on all that smoky, fatty, salty lactose, which just tasted great. But I was more enamored with the fact that they accomplished the same functional purpose of a traditional fish narutomaki. Overall, this bowl is a piece of my soul, so I dare you to say something mean about it. Come over sometime and we can have a big family barbecue. Thanks for joining me for another bowl. I can't wait to see you again soon. Please consider subscribing for more.